So I'm going to try and keep it upbeat and talk about some lessons that we've generated through some work at ODI working with Australian Aid about how you can design and implement safety nets better in order to build the resilience of poor people. And part of what I'm going to talk about is whether social safety nets are part of what you have if you have resilience. You can't have resilience without an existing safety net system, or whether we can use safety nets themselves in order to then build resilience, because I think they're two different processes. So the context, why social protection and resilience? I'm not really going to talk about this very much, except to say increasing risks, we've heard about them, idiosyncratic, covariant, and so on, and a view that social protection can help us both protect people's basic consumption, but also protect their assets. So supporting people so that they don't sell off their last ploughing oxen and can't plough next year. Supporting people so that they don't eat their own seed and therefore have nothing to plant in the subsequent year. What we tried to do in this piece of work, though, is step a bit beyond trying to define and explain what resilience is and the relationship between that and social protection, and ask ourselves the question, is it specific types of social protection instruments? So is it cash transfers? Is it food transfers? Is it school feeding? Is it public works that contribute to resilience? Is it because of the type of instrument you use? Or is it specific features of your program design? How often you deliver transfers, how large they are, who you target them to? Or is it specific features of program implementation, whether you do it on time, whether you say that whether you do what you said you were going to do for communities that have resulted in enhancing people's resilience? And we did this by looking at 5 programs. I'm not going to talk about the programs in detail, in particular because we're about to hear about one of them, the PSMP in Ethiopia. I'm just going to try and draw out some general lessons. We use this definition of resilience. People have all sorts of different definitions. This was one that we worked out because of the context in which we were working, the kinds of programs that we were working on, and the partner that we were working with, Australian Aid. And what we wanted to put into this was not just people being able to meet their needs and buffer shocks, but having a vision of long-term security that enables them to make certain kinds of decisions. So, input or outcome. I mean, in our analytical framework, we tried to think about social protection playing 2 linked but different roles in assisting households or people to meet their needs. And one of them was the ways in which social protection can enhance people's livelihoods and make them more resilient. So by improving their livelihoods through social protection, people are better able to cope with shocks. They help households increase the assets that they have. They enable households to buffer themselves against specific threats. So social protection in that scenario allows people themselves independently to be resilient in the face of shocks. But we think that social protection has another role to play, and one that often isn't discussed. We tend to talk about social protection as, well, if you get it right, people will become more productive and they won't need social protection anymore. But for us, having a social protection system in place is part of how we define resilience. If you don't have something for people to fall back on, whatever their situation, then you don't have resilience. Okay? It's a key part of the puzzle. And we think that that second thing often gets ignored. We're all about trying to graduate households into being independent, but we don't talk enough about a long-term system to support them when they need it. The next thing that we've heard about already is how many different things you need to achieve social protection, to achieve resilience. And we ask this question, is social protection alone enough to achieve resilience? And there's a bit of a yes and no to this answer. The no bit is that beyond providing basic income support to people, you also have to do a whole heap of other things, and we're hearing about lots of them now on the panel. So you might need to transfer assets as well as basic income support. You might need to provide training, credit support, savings, finance, and so on. And only then will you reach a point where people achieve those sustainable livelihoods and are able to protect themselves from shocks. And this example is from the Protracted Relief Programme in Zimbabwe. This is the view that they have of how you achieve resilience and what is needed. The next thing that we focused on were, across the range of programs that we looked at, what features of design and implementation contribute to resilience. And so the first one, we've just heard about it in the slide before, combining instruments or linking explicitly to other complementary programs or instruments is how you achieve resilience. And we're going to hear a bit more about how they do that in the PSMP. It's the PSMP in combination with other things that helps you achieve resilience. Some of the other messages: a longer program duration, allowing beneficiaries to receive transfers over a much longer time frame. Supporting households for 1, 2, 3 years is not going to get them to resilience through social protection. You need to do it for a protracted period of time. We also found that in programs where there was capacity to increase the level of benefit during a particular shock event was critical for maintaining resilience. And we actually found it really quite ironic that programs that were meant to be put in place to protect people against shocks told us, oh, well, it didn't work very well because a shock came along and we weren't ready for it, which, you know, there's something going really, really wrong there. So that flexibility to change the program was critical in particular places. The other one was having a really clear and realistic logic for how you get that graduation from being dependent on social protection into an independent livelihood. And what we found in programs where people hadn't thought it through carefully enough, for example, where the asset transferred exactly the same thing to every household, or the credit was used exactly the same way in a village by every household. So if every woman in the village buys a sewing machine, the market for selling clothes is going to get saturated pretty quickly. If everybody says, I'm going to set up a hammer mill to grind maize, you only really need one hammer mill per village. It becomes hugely problematic. And people in some programs hadn't really thought that through well enough. And then finally, other kinds of adaptation and flexibility matter. So changing the timing of your payments, changing the size of your payments, as we'd already discussed, and just being able to play around with those features. Some things undermine resilience through social protection. Most of them are the opposite to what I just said. So if you don't have complementary interventions, if you aren't able to be flexible, if you're not thinking clearly about how people's livelihoods are going to change. But there are other ones that we found that were really important. The first of all is us having very unrealistic expectations of how much households will be able to accumulate assets using social protection, giving how long we give them support for, the kinds of support we give them. So if we give people food transfers, they're less likely to accumulate assets than if we give them cash transfers. And also the level of transfers that we pay. In Nepal, the child grant transfers per month the equivalent of about the price of a chicken. You're not going to make massive changes to somebody's livelihoods with that level of transfer. The second one is this idea that we've actually been very unprepared for dealing with shocks in a lot of programs. So if you don't have a strategy for dealing with any kind of shock, whether it's a natural disaster, conflict, and so on, your social protection program is not going to help you to deliver resilience. The third one is the too limited range of options for investing in livelihoods. So quite often people will get a choice between 3 different livelihood activities that they'll be supported to pursue. It's just not broad enough in many of the cases that we saw. And then a final one, which is this imbalance between these sometimes competing objectives that we get in social protection programs. And this is a challenge for Ethiopia in the PSMP. That is your objective, is your primary objective to maintain people's basic consumption, to just make sure they've got enough food to eat? Or is your primary objective promoting the accumulation of assets? Because how you run your program, the period of time that you run it for, the amount or the size of the transfer that you provide people with will be different depending on what you're doing. And there is often a trade-off. It's not a win-win situation trying to meet those 2 objectives. So how do we make some of this real, right? We keep talking to people about how you need to have all of these different complementary things to achieve resilience. And I sit there and I think, if you're somebody in government in Ethiopia, if you're an advisor in a donor agency trying to support social protection, how helpful is it to be constantly hearing about complexity, about layering of different interventions, about coordination? Not very, right? What is it that you can do in your day-to-day job? Well, we think that there is something that really matters for resilience that people can achieve within social protection without having to have this wonderful vision of all of these programs linked together. And that's doing it right. okay? That's delivering it well. And what we found is that some of the big things that really matter for achieving resilience through social protection are delivering a decent amount of cash or food or whatever it is. Don't mess around with your one chicken per month to try and support a household of 10 people. Deliver something meaningful that they can do something with. Deliver it for a reasonable duration of time. Deliver it reliably when you said you would, not 2 months later, not two weeks later, and deliver it at the right time of year when people need it. Now, those are all things that are within the control of people working on social protection programs. So there is something that you can do, even if you're slightly worried about this huge picture. And my way of thinking about this and prioritising what people in social protection should do is this picture here. Apologies to a couple of you who saw it last week in Kigali. You can just about see what it is, right? It's a Christmas tree. Why can't you quite see what it is? Why is it difficult to see? It's cluttered with stuff, right? And my question is, for social protection programs, how much stuff should we clutter them with in order to achieve resilience? And where's that balance between trying to do too much with a relatively simple instrument versus still having these sometimes heroic ambitions to achieve resilience using a simple instrument? And my fear with this is either that tree is just going to fall down, it's overloaded, or that actually underneath there, you can't see that the tree has died, right? The needles have all fallen off, they've gone brown, okay? And that if we load up social protection programs with too much, then the social protection program itself will not be able to deliver what it's supposed to. So, in conclusion, what do we need to do? On the one hand, we need to avoid this tendency that we get across programs to sort of underestimate how complicated it is trying to do resilience programming. And I think critically, we need to not oversell what we can do, especially with social protection. And I just want to flag that the overselling thing for me is something that happens at headquarters and central level. I don't hear people in the field overselling what they can achieve with their programs. I just see these expectations getting massively out of hand at headquarters level. How do we do that? How do we avoid that tendency? And I guess for me, in the case of social protection, it's concentrating on getting basic programming right. Have as few objectives as possible. Don't have 20 objectives for a cash transfer program. Have 1 or 2. Use really simple instruments with not loads of these add-ons, no extra Christmas tree decorations if you can avoid it. And most importantly of all, deliver on time when you said you would, because that is the way in which people are able to make really sensible investment decisions with the money that you transfer to them. Okay, thank you.